on the church calendar, which means it's the Sunday before Easter, of course. And as we recollect from the story given to us in all four Gospels, there was a procession led by Jesus riding on a donkey coming into Jerusalem. And he had a bunch of people with him in this procession, and they were praising him, and they were thanking God, and they were worshiping Jesus. And by the way, it was completely appropriate for them to do that. There were some religious leaders that didn't like that. They didn't like that there was people that were worshiping Jesus. And they would be right if Jesus wasn't God himself, because the Bible tells us that we're only to worship God. And so as they were worshiping Jesus, they were doing what was very appropriate because Jesus is God. And we're going to be talking about that more next week. These 2 weeks, today and next week, as we go into Easter, we're going to answer the question, who do you say that I am? Who is Jesus? We're going to answer that question from what the Bible teaches us, who Jesus is. We want to understand who he is exactly, and we want to be able to answer that personally. My challenge to you is to think carefully as to what you would answer if you were put on the spot, if you were, a stage light was put on you and you had a crowd of people watching and listening, and a microphone was put in front of your face, and you were asked, who do you say Jesus is? What would be your answer? And that's a very important thing to wrestle with, to think through, and to come to a point of true conviction. Who is Jesus? Who would you say he is? And so again, we'll talk about that today, and then in part 2 next week. And then also next week, we'll launch a new series where we're going to turn that question around. And instead of answering the question of who we would say Jesus is, I want to then answer the question, who would Jesus say that we are? In other words, who are you, your identity? So this is a number of weeks we're going to launch into this idea of identity, because there's a lot of people that struggle with knowing who they are. And the reason they struggle with that is because they don't know, first of all, who God is. They don't know who Jesus is, really don't know him. And so that's why we need to talk about that first. And then who are you? And your identity is wrapped up in who he is and who he says you are, who he says that I am, all right? So just so that we know where we're all going with this. So if an employer does an identity search on you and they pull your name up, Tammy's right now is going through doing a bunch of hiring right now for school for next year. And so when you look at candidates and you look at someone you're thinking about hiring and you pull a name up or you Google a name, all of a sudden a bunch of people come up, right? It's not, you realize, oh, I thought my name was kind of unique, Steve Dirksen, and it's spelled kind of weird. And you look it up, I'm like, oh, there's a bunch of other Steve Dirksens. There's even another pastor, Steve Dirksen. He's a pastor in Canada. I thought, oh, that's kind of cool, all right? And it's spelled the same way, right? So there's all these different people with the same name. And so if I'm searching for an applicant, I'm looking for a particular person, right? A particular unique person. I want to find out about this particular person who's applied for my job. Or if I'm a parent who has lost my child in some sort of mall or at Walmart, and I'm searching for my child, not any child will do at that moment, right? I'll just grab the first child I see, right? No, I'm looking for a particular child, right? And so we're thinking about the uniqueness, the unique person, Jesus Christ. And then again, as we go into this series, the uniqueness about who you are as a creation of God, one and only. You are one and only, and Jesus also is one and only. And if you asked me that question, who am I? There's different levels of understanding or of description that you could understand about me, right? So there's the public persona that you might know about me, that some people might know about my reputation, or maybe the Wikipedia version. I know I don't have a Wikipedia page yet. Maybe someday I'll be big deal enough to have my own Wikipedia page, Steve Dirksen. I don't know. Do any of you have a Wikipedia page? I don't think so. But there's that public profile, right? So maybe it's what I would learn about you if I went on to LinkedIn. If I went on to your Instagram or your Facebook page, and it's your profile, it's the general information about who you are. That's your public persona, right? And that's you, but it's not much about you. And so if you ask me, like, okay, Pastor Steve, but who really are you? And then I could reveal to you a little bit deeper level. I could tell you about my opinions. I could tell you about my tastes and my style, my convictions, my character. I could start to reveal more and more about who I am. And so that's what we're wanting to do. We're wanting to go a little bit deeper, and we're wanting to make sure that we can identify who Jesus is from a personal perspective, not from a public perspective, not being able to say that, okay, who is Jesus to me? And then I'm going to read his LinkedIn page. Oh, this is who. No, that's a very impersonal connection if that's my answer about who Jesus is. But if my answer to who Jesus is a personal, I know this guy. I have a relationship with him. Let me tell you about him. Let me tell you about what it's been like to hang around Jesus and to have conversations with Jesus and to have Jesus minister to me and for me to serve him. And let me tell you about what that kind of life has been like and to share in a very personal way. That's what I hope for you, that we as a church, those watching online, that we can answer with that kind of personal way. And so that's what we're going to talk about today, because there were three groups of people as Jesus comes into Jerusalem, and there's this entourage, there's this public parade, you might think of. And the reason that this was happening is, first of all, there's a lot of people that are coming into Jerusalem because they're coming for the Passover. That's a pilgrimage holiday. And so they were required to come, especially the males were required to come every year to Jerusalem. And so the population of Jerusalem would swell by hundreds of thousands of additional people that are coming there to celebrate the Passover season, the Passover festival. And so there's all these people going up. And then some of them hear that this guy, Jesus, who they've been hearing about, now realize this is a day and age where there wasn't social media, there wasn't cable TV. Communication didn't happen through cell phones or text messaging. In other words, information had to pass just through the grapevine. And so it wasn't quite as fluid as it is in our day and age. And yet Jesus has been ministering for 3 years. And so word is getting around about this unique guy. And his name's Jesus. And it's not just Jesus, but it's Jesus of Nazareth, right? So we're trying to identify this Jesus, this unique Jesus. He's Jesus of Nazareth. Just like we learn about Mary, just as an example, there were multiple Marys. You remember Mary Magdalene? Well, that was to identify Mary from the other Marys. Mary Magdalene was Mary of the town of Magdala. So they called her Mary Magdalene, Mary the Magdalene, right? She's from Magdala. That Mary. And Jesus the Nazarene, the guy from up north. And so they understand this is who Jesus is, and he's coming into town, and the crowd hears about it, and they begin to look for him and then to celebrate him and to worship him. And Jesus says, when the religious leaders don't like this, they say, Jesus, stop your disciples from doing this. And Jesus said, if they don't worship me, do you remember what Jesus said? The very rocks will cry out. So this morning we sang some extra songs because today I believe is an important day to remember how important it is that we worship God, that we lift up his name, and as his disciples, as people who follow Jesus, that we are given testimony to how great Jesus is and what he's done in our lives. We should be speaking well of him all the time and praising him and lifting his name up all the time. Let's read the passage here then. So the crowd is looking for Jesus. They're praising him. They see him coming. They go and they're ushering him into Jerusalem with their praise. In Matthew 21, 1 through 9, as they approached Jerusalem and came to Bethphage on the Mount of Olives, Jesus sent 2 disciples, saying to them, go to the village ahead of you, and at once you will find a donkey tied there with her colt by her. Untie them and bring them to me. If anyone says anything to you, say that the Lord needs them, and he will send them right away. This took place to fulfill what was spoken through the prophet. And of course, Matthew is very excited about pointing out when Jesus fulfilled prophecy, which he did many times. Here's the prophecy. Say to daughter Zion, see, your king comes to you, gentle and riding on a donkey, and on a colt and a foal of a donkey. The disciples went and did as Jesus had instructed them. They brought the donkey and the colt and placed their cloaks on them for Jesus to sit on. A very large crowd spread their cloaks on the road. Others cut branches from trees and spread them on the road. The crowds that went ahead of him and those that followed shouted, Hosanna to the Son of David. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Hosanna in the highest heaven. So that's through verse 9. Now verse 10, a question is asked by the crowd. See, again, we can understand certain levels about a person, and we can start off with this public knowledge. So the crowd, we're going to start off with we're going to talk about some groups and how they understood Jesus. And we're going to look, first of all, at the crowd. They asked this question in verse 10. When Jesus entered Jerusalem, the whole city was stirred and asked, what question did they ask? Who is this? Or in the words of the Princess Bride guy, who are you? I must know, right? You guys Princess Bride fans? Who is this? Who is this man? And this is something people ask today. They run into somebody who's a celebrity, and you hear that this person has 1 million followers, and you've never heard their name. What do you usually do? Like, I got to find out who this is, right? Or so Zach and I were asking that question. This is 4 years ago. We were at the Phoenix Open, and it was the Celebrity Pro-Am. So it's before the actual tournament starts, and so you got these celebrities playing with the pros. And let me show you 6 people that we ran into on that day. So this is back in 2020, right before COVID got bad, right before they started closing everything down. So Zach, let's see if everyone knows who these people are. I can't really see his picture there, so that's not fair. But that's Emmitt Smith. That's Emmitt Smith. All right. John, you know who Emmitt Smith is. Anybody, I don't know if you can recognize there. Yeah, you recognize Zach. In the shade there, Josh Allen. Josh Allen, pretty, right? Am I right? Yeah. Okay, pretty cool. All right, number 3. So not really seeing the face there either. You have to remind me, Zach, who that was. I forgot. Michael Phelps. All right, that was Michael Phelps. We ran into him at there. And then this was, you probably have to remind me, who was this one? What? Say it loud. Dierks Bentley. Now, we had no idea. We knew he was popular because of the way people were acting around him, but we had no idea who he was. I still don't know who he is, but apparently he's a pretty popular country singer. We got one more, right? All right, you guys recognize him from what's his name, Zach? What's that? From what TV show, or from what? Dude Perfect. That's right, from the podcast Dude Perfect. All right, so is that it? One more? What do you got? Oh, yeah. I know him. Tony Lavulo, all right? The Diamondbacks manager. There we go. All right, thank you. So we're going around meeting these celebrities, and I'm seeing people respond. I'm like, who is that? Oh, that's somebody important. We should get an autograph, or we should get a picture with that person, right? So we run into these celebrities. We run into people that have this celebrity status, and we're suddenly interested in them. The crowds are interested in Jesus. They've heard certain things about him. He has a reputation. Now let's move on to verse 11. The crowds answered, "This is Jesus the prophet from Nazareth in Galilee." All right, this is the public image of Jesus, right? This is just Jesus in general. This is his LinkedIn description. Jesus from Nazareth in Galilee, right? So, but there are identifying someone particular. This is a unique person. Jesus, they've identified him as a prophet, as someone from Nazareth, not from down south where you would expect prophets to come from Jerusalem, all right? And so but let's get into those and find out who understood and knew Jesus better on a more personal level. There's three groups of people that are asking and answering this question. Group number one is the crowd that we just identified. The crowd knew Jesus publicly. So if you asked this question, right, of anyone, there's going to be a certain answer that we know based on their reputation, based on what you see of them online. And as we were mentioning, Tammy hiring people, she would not be able to call a reference on someone who only knew of an applicant publicly, right? So a person couldn't write down someone to be their reference on a job if they don't actually know them. They would just be reading off of their, off their Facebook page. So there's a general understanding, there's a knowledge that the crowd has of Jesus, but it's not personal. It's not anything significant. Group number two is those who were acquainted with Jesus. His acquaintances knew Jesus privately, all right? So the crowd knew Jesus publicly. His acquaintances knew Jesus privately. So they knew some of the backstory. They knew some of the details about Jesus and his life and his ministry, and they could talk about those things. They could share interesting stories and interesting tidbits and facts about Jesus and his life and different things about him. So these are people that knew him. They came up close to Jesus. They hung around Jesus. They followed close to him, close enough that they could be a part of what was going on, and they could hear what Jesus was saying, and they could see exactly what Jesus was doing. So this would be like when Zach and I were at the golf tournament. We could go up to, they usually had some sort of barrier or some sort of fencing that we could go right up to that, and the players and the celebrities might be just a few feet away from us, talking or putting or whatever they're doing, and so we could hear them. And we're real close, we could see everything that they're doing. And so it was really interesting to get up close to celebrities like that. And so we're seeing things and we're understanding things, and this is the way people were with Jesus. They got up close to him, but there was no personal relationship though, right? So I couldn't say that I know Dierks Bentley just because I got up close to him, right? I couldn't say that any of these celebrities or athletes that I know them, but I could tell you something about the experience that we had there. And so Jesus had people that were around him all the time that were seeing these things, but they couldn't tell you anything from a personal level. And that's group three, is the disciples knew Jesus personally. So there were those who were acquainted and following close to Jesus that knew him privately, but there was his disciples that knew him personally. And that's where I want to focus the rest of our time on and ask ourselves, do we know Jesus personally? When he asks us the question, who do you say that I am? Can we answer that question from a personal perspective? I think, first of all, I'm going to give you some examples here. Zacchaeus. Think about Zacchaeus. He's described as being, or in the Bible, but also the song about him, was a wee little man, right? Zacchaeus was a wee little man, and a wee little man was he, right? So that's how the song goes. And then it tells us, the Bible tells us, he wanted to get up close to Jesus. He wanted to see and hear Jesus. He wanted that close proximity, but he didn't know Jesus, and Jesus didn't know him yet. So he climbed up in a tree to be able to get a good view of Jesus as Jesus was passing by. And Jesus stops, and he looks up at Zacchaeus, and he says, Zacchaeus, come on down. I'm coming over to your house. What was that? What was Jesus doing? He was giving an invitation to personal relationship. Jesus saw the interest that Zacchaeus had in him, but also knew that although proximity, physical, locational proximity was close, within just a few feet, relational proximity was a wide distance. There was no closeness relationally. There was no closeness or intimacy between Jesus and Zacchaeus. Jesus wants to bridge that and be close to Zacchaeus, have a friendship with him. And so he says, let's hang out. Let's get to know each other. Let's start a friendship. Let's start a relationship. Zacchaeus is really excited. Two more examples. Matthew chapter 16, I'll read these. Matthew 16, verses 13 through 17 is the next example. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say the Son of Man is?" Here's that question. Jesus is asking the disciples, "Who am I?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets. But what about you?" he asked. "Who do you say I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." Jesus replied, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven." Jesus' answer to the question, when Jesus said, "Who do you say that I am?" The answer the answer Peter gives about Jesus reveals the closeness that Peter has with God. In other words, Jesus is telling him, no one could have given me that answer unless you had a close relationship with God. So how blessed are you, Peter, to be someone who is in intimate relationship with God? So I ask you, and I ask those who are watching online, are you someone who just understands God in a public, general way, and you can describe God to me well, right? And in a pinch, if you're trying to impress the pastor or trying to answer maybe your kids about who's God, and you could give a pretty good answer, that's the public persona. And then there's those who hang around church and they listen to sermons. For those that during Jesus' time, they're hanging around Jesus, and they can give you more than just the public profile of who Jesus is. They can tell you all kinds of things. They can tell you about how great it was when Jesus took the fish and the loaves and he fed 5,000 people. They can tell you these amazing stories and details about Jesus' life, but yet there's still this relational distance. There's a close proximity. They've been around religious people. They've been around church. They've been talking the talk, and they know how to do it, but there's no relationship. And so that's what we're looking at here is Jesus says to Peter, at least you, I don't know about the other disciples yet, but at least you at this point have a close relationship with God. Our last example, and there's plenty others, but Matthew chapter 14, verse 25. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage, it is I." It's the unique Jesus of Nazareth, this particular person. He said, "It's me. So don't be afraid." "Lord, if it's you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you on the water." "Come," he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. One of the unique characteristics of a disciple is they want to do everything their master does. So if you aspire to be a disciple of Jesus Christ, then as you read the Bible and see things that he did, then you and I are aspiring to do all the same things that Jesus did. That's what a disciple does. A disciple can recite the teachings of his rabbi, of his master. A disciple understands the priorities of the master. The disciple wants to mimic everything about the master, wants to be just like the rabbi. Peter wants to be in other words, he wants to have that intimate, close relationship where he can do it's kind of like sometimes you see a young person who just idolizes an older brother or an older friend and wants to be just like them, right? Sorry. So, in our relationship with God, is it that personal? Is it like in this example where Peter says, I don't want to just be able to talk about how Jesus walked on the water. I want to experience that with Jesus. I want the intimacy of walking on the water with Jesus. So there's a process that we go through to be able to truly answer the question correctly when Jesus says, "Who do you say that I am?" Right? I know what others say. I don't care what others say. Who do you say that I am? And I want Mountain Vista Church, I want all of us to be able to honestly give an answer to that question reflecting our intimate relationship, our personal relationship with God. That we don't just know about him, and we don't just know a bunch of details and facts, but we know him personally. So there's this process that moves from public to private to personal. And so more than just being around church and more than just reading our Bibles, it's going to that next level. Well, the disciples, how did they get to that next level? Well, it was always a response to an invitation that Jesus gave. So when Jesus invited them to do things, even in this case of Peter walking on the water, Jesus said to Peter, "Come, Peter." It was an invitation. "Come on out in the water with me. The water's warm." No, not really. It was a little scary out there. But he said, "Come on, Peter." It was an invitation. And you see Jesus all the time giving invitations to Zacchaeus. "Here, I want to go hang out with you at your house." Or to Matthew, the tax collector. Invitations to the disciples to come follow me. Leave your parents, leave your vocation, come follow me. Invitation. And when God gives us invitations to follow him, to obey him, we respond and say, "Okay, I believe God is talking to me. I believe he's given me an invitation here to do something," so that everything about my life should be about a response to invitations. In other words, I'm not trying to check boxes that I'm a religious person. I'm hearing from God in every step of life. So being here in a church service, worshiping God together, isn't about checking some sort of box or trying to do some sort of penance, but it's about hearing from God that God wants you to be here. The conviction that God wants you to be with other believers, that there is something godly and right about doing that and about worshiping together and serving together and sitting underneath the teaching of God's word together, that God has called me to do that. He has called you to do that. And he's called us to go on mission trips, and he's called us to help reach out and serve the poor or the least or the lost, whatever God has put on your heart to do. And when you hear from God, you respond to that invitation, and that's the faith relationship that makes things personal between you and him. And so when someone asks you, "Well, who is Jesus to you?" you can talk in personal way, in the same way that I would describe my wife to you, not as some sort of person that I don't know, but I can read her Instagram page, but someone that I know in a personal way. So that's what God is challenging us to do. Your take home today is trusting Jesus is how we know him personally. That's how you know Jesus personally, is you trust him. And so when he calls you, when he invites you, you respond in trust. We trust him. When the Bible talks about our faith, that we're to put our faith in Jesus Christ, what that means is trust, right? So verse after verse after verse tells us that we're saved by faith, that God has called us to be people of faith, that we please him by our faith. What does that faith mean? It means trust, that I trust him. I trust God. Do you trust God today? What is the problem that you're facing that he wants you to trust him with? What is the goal that you are pursuing that he wants you to trust him to accomplish? What is it in your life, the need that you have? What is it? Think about everything in your life that God is calling you to just trust him. And guess what? If you're trusting him and it doesn't work out the way you wanted it to work out in your life, if the goal you were pursuing, if the need isn't fulfilled, if whatever it is that you have that you're trying to trust God with, the big challenge of your life right now, and you're trusting him and it's not working out the way you want, then we can still trust that God is in control. But if I don't trust him and things aren't working out, then I'm going to get frustrated. Then I'm going to get angry. Then I'm going to get bitter about things in life. But if things don't work out according to the way I want to, then I can just trust. Okay, God, I've been trusting you, and it's not exactly happening the way I thought it would or wanted it to, but I do trust you anyway, God. And that's when the trust really kicks in, is when things aren't really going my way. And so I'm going to keep trusting you anyway, because God, I believe that you're real and that you are way smarter than me and that you are all powerful, that you have a plan. And I may not fully understand that plan, but I believe that you have a plan. God has a plan for our lives. God has a plan for your lives. Let's trust him in all things in our lives. And guess what? A lot of times God works things out in a way that far surpasses what we would have ever imagined, what we could have ever hoped for and dreamed of. And in those cases, we just give him the praise and the glory. God, thank you for answering my prayer. God, thank you for the miracle. God, thank you for healing. God, thank you for saving my friend, for saving my family member, whatever it was that we're praying for. And we trusted him, and he came through, and we thank him for that, and we praise and give him the glory. Let's wrap up today with taking communion together. I'm going to invite David to come on up here. So we haven't done this in a while. I apologize for that. I want to be more consistent on regularly remembering to observe a time. Some call this the Lord's Supper. We keep it real simple, but it's a time of remembrance of what Jesus did for us. It's that personal relationship we have with him that we remember that the reason we can have this personal relationship that I'm talking about today is because he died on the cross for my sins. He rose from the dead, which we're going to celebrate next week. And we need to remember that. And Jesus actually said, I want you to remember that. I want you to make a point to remember the sacrifice that I made, the blood that I shed for the remission of sin, and the fact that I rose from the dead to conquer death and sin. And so what we're doing is we're remembering all of that, the very core of our faith. And we're also in our time of communion or the Lord's Supper is we are also proclaiming, the Bible says, we're proclaiming his death and his resurrection until he comes. As his followers and his disciples, we are called to be proclaimers of the truth, proclaimers of the gospel. And so there's gonna be, in a second, you're gonna go back to the table in the back and you can get a little cup of juice and a little wafer and just bring it back to your seat. And if you would just hold on to those and pray and reflect on your relationship with God. And if there's sin in your life that you want to confess to him, that God has made you aware of, that you feel some guilt for, just confess that to God. This is a great time to do that and just to make things good between you and him. He loves you and he forgives us, but sometimes we make decisions, even as Christians, where we need to repair the fellowship with him. And so this is a good time to do that. And so just confess your sin to God and remember that you're forgiven. We're forgiven of all of our sin at the cross. Jesus said, tetelestai, the debt has been paid in full. And so we believe that he paid the debt for all of our sin, that there's no sin that you have to pay for. There's no sin that you have to redeem, but that it's all been paid for already. So we're just, during this time, just reflecting and thanking God for dying on the cross. So right now, if you would, I'm gonna just encourage you to go to the back table and then bring it back to your seats, and I will pray and we'll eat and drink together.